You're listening to On Mission with Dr. Matt Davis, a podcast designed to explore the personal mission of everyday leaders. Hear from men and women who are making a difference in their corner of the world and discover what keeps them on mission.
Welcome to On Mission with Dr. Matt Davis. I'm Jonathan Sheely. Our guest today is Miss Renee Westphall, former Dean of Women and current counselor and advisor at Maranatha. Renee is celebrating 25 years at Maranatha this year. She served as the Dean of Women and taught counseling classes in the College of Bible and Church Ministries. Renee is a frequent speaker at seminars, retreats, ladies' meetings, and educational venues nationwide when she is not counseling and mentoring young ladies on our campus. Her first job ever was a baton twirling instructor. Her favorite meal is Thanksgiving dinner, and some of her hobbies include traveling, attending sports or music events, and reading. Renee's favorite sport team depends on where she lives. Packers, Brewers, and Bucks are on the top right now, but she's still loyal to Michigan football and the Miami Dolphins. Renee, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Okay, I can't let this go.
Kind of afraid of what's coming here.
No one informed me about this, okay? I feel like I needed to know this information far sooner than today. Baton twirling instructor? What is that? What is it?
It's true. You teach baton twirling.
But how is that a thing that people need to learn? What in the world?
There are even world competitions for baton twirling. Have you ever watched a college band? Like the University of Michigan or Wisconsin?
Usually I'm going to get a pretzel.
There you go. But there are always twirlers. Yeah.
Twirlers. I mean, I guess it's
so why don't we have an elective?
Yeah. How does that translate into life? You must have been so good at it, personally, that they said you should be the teacher of the baton twirlers. Yeah. What can you do with it?
One.
Are there? Do they actually twirl it, or do they just make it look like they're twirling? Because I do it. I just do it real fast, and it looks like.
Yeah, no.
And then there's also throwing.
Yeah, true.
And catching, hopefully, but not hitting.
Well, usually not.
That's accidental if it happens.
Okay. Not if I was doing it. Weapon. Yeah. Oh, man. And how do you judge a good one from a bad one?
Oh, well, that's not hard to tell.
It's obvious.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious.
Maybe.
Is it related to control?
No. Well, there's control, and there are things that you can do and can't do. I mean,
parameters. Yeah.
No.
Are there rules? Can you win?
Well, you can win if you're good enough.
Do they keep score?
Yeah.
You know what? I'm gonna be on YouTube after this.
Yeah. All right. Here's the deal. Somebody make a note. Fact-Staff picnic this coming year. Okay. You teach me how to do the baton twirling. You're gonna have to practice this summer. Get the fingers.
I don't think you ever learn. I don't think you forget that. It's
am
like
I too old to learn it?
Oh no. That's a challenge.
Let's go. I'm ready. I'll learn how to do it.
I regret ever telling anybody that I did that, I think.
You've never told anybody?
Oh, no, here.
Oh, here. Well, now the secret is out. You're going to have a line at your door. People probably want to know.
I doubt it.
All right. So in all seriousness, today we had our Fact-Staff Recognition Chapel, and the idea was to honor those that have achieved certain levels of service, tiers of service, years of service. And 25 years, had the honor to read your bio to the students and tell them a little bit about the extraordinary life that you have had. And now we take a moment to kind of explore that a little bit more detail. But what a great event, right? I mean, to be able to see, and it's always difficult for me to be the one having to read these and present them, because just emotionally it's what an honor to be able to serve alongside these folks. This is the greatest professional honor that any of us could have, and it's also challenging to see the faithfulness and the longevity. So I'm very thankful to have had the opportunity to tell folks about your life today, and I know that's a little uneasy, it can be a little embarrassing for people to make a fuss, but I think it's necessary, and I think it's biblical to honor people who have such extraordinary good testimony, as really not just for their sake, but as a model for others as well. So looking forward to hearing a little more in the thrust of our podcast about what's behind the scenes for that, what motivates that. We see the result, but now we want to talk a little bit more about how that was achieved.
Yeah, so one of the questions that we always ask our guests is, do you have a personal mission in life?
I do. I think Emily probably, in what you read, actually stated it. So
she
I
stole
guess
your
I
mission?
communicated.
Or you communicated it, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think probably to sum it up would be to faithfully love and serve God and others by using the resources, talents, abilities that God has given me. That fits in any season of life. It fits in any ministry.
Yeah.
It really, it's broad, but it's
so,
what's behind it all.
So faithfully loving and serving God and others is a big picture thing. How does that show up in concrete ways in guiding the choices that you make or how you live your life?
I would say here, especially mentoring, discipling, advising. Student Life Office still asks my input.
I hope so.
Well, they don't have to.
They better.
They're functioning fine without me.
Well, there's a need, though, and there's a value to the consistency and to the history of lessons learned. And there's a human nature that, although times change, human nature is basically the same throughout all the different eras. And that perspective is so valuable for how we can keep continuity and culture within an organization as well. So your input in that remains tremendously valuable. And yet you've also kind of branched into even new phases of ministry even now. So you were a teacher, an administrator, a baton twirling instructor at some point, and also then Dean of Women for all of those years, as well as having input on the administrative cabinet, which is really more of a broad institutional level of leadership and interaction at that level as well. And then in the classroom with the biblical counseling programs that you've taught in, and helping and counseling just scores and scores, hundreds, I'm sure, of students over the years. And do you in some ways kind of adopt them a little bit and kind of keep tabs and track of those that have sort of gone on and had some things achieved in their life as well? Well,
I just got an email from someone my first year being here who was really, I don't know how much to say because somebody might know who I'm talking about, but was suicidal, didn't want to be here, didn't want to do life, came from a pretty rough, dysfunctional family. But I got an email from her just thanking me for my input, not giving up on her, continuing to help over all these 25 years. And she's now going for a degree in biblical counseling.
Wow. Really?
That's what it's about.
Wow.
It's actually not uncommon, is it,
No.
for people who have had something that God sort of delivered them from in some way, whether it was a personal tragedy or even being victimized in some way, or whether it was a struggle with some addiction or some choices, and what they've learned along the way. It's a very normal and Christian response to want to take that and use it for God's glory and maybe to help someone else. And oftentimes that does lead to someone choosing to go into biblical counseling.
Yeah.
What is that role like to be a biblical counselor? It sounds pastoral, but it's not strictly positionally pastoral.
No, it is not positionally, but it's the same.
Yeah. So what does that look like? Is it formal sessions where someone sits on the couch, or probably a little bit of
I don't have
it
a
all?
couch.
I mean, we think about like psychologists. Yeah. Oh, well, maybe that's part of your deal.
Yeah.
I don't know. But give me a little idea. Give us an idea of what that kind of thing looks like, because maybe it's intimidating for someone to even ask for help in that way.
Oh, I think it is intimidating. That's why I try to have an open door, and it's word of mouth a lot. Like I know this lady that will listen to you, kind of thing. But it's really trying to help somebody change and grow. I hate to even use the word counseling, to be honest with you. I think it's being a Titus 2 woman, helping the next generation. But I also say we're always somebody's older woman, somebody's younger woman,
Mm-hmm.
because we're all a product of somebody else's investment. So I think a lot of my calling is to invest in others, whatever that looks like for whatever time I have, because somebody else is going to keep investing when they leave here.
So if you don't like to call it counseling, what would you prefer it be called?
I think it's mentoring. I think it's discipling. I'm not saying counseling doesn't happen, because it is the word we use. But counseling to me sounds a little clinical.
Sure.
And I try not to have a clinical approach. I have hopefully a professional approach, like we have things to accomplish, let's get at it. But not an intimidating, I'm afraid to put anything on the table to talk about kind of. They're already intimidated just coming in.
So describe the life cycle of that when you have someone new that you're trying to get to know and help. Maybe there's some specific issue that's on the table. Kind of help me understand how you go from that first conversation and then what it looks like after you finally have established some good sort of flow of communication and a bit of a trust relationship there.
It depends if they're coming by themselves and asked for help, or if somebody's forcing them to come, which never works. Or if somebody comes with them because they said, I'll go with you. But the truth is, no matter who comes in, you do some small talk, you find a road of connection, and then you go from there. I can't, in all of these years, I can't remember anybody that refused to talk.
What do you tell them that helps them rest a little more easily or be a little bit more comfortable?
Oh, I connect with them. I usually ask them about them. You know, who are you? Where are you from? Tell me about your family. And then I get to the point of, how can I help you?
It's a really tough thing, because somebody's nervous. You're a stranger maybe at that point, and you're trying to get past being a stranger and become more trusted. But then you're sort of being asked to lay yourself open, and to express your deepest, darkest concerns and fears. So it's a hard thing to go from here to here. That's why I was kind of asking, like, what are the tools of the trade? What do you use to be able to try and communicate competence and maybe even hope? Like, do you ever talk to people who have sort of given up on the idea that there's that they even have a hope for change or victory?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
So how do you focus them? What do you explain we're doing here? Like, they come in, they say, I don't know, so-and-so told me that maybe you can help me. You kind of know the basic issue, that at least they think this is the basic issue. And they say, but what is this? What are you going to do for me?
I ask lots of questions. And you try not to make adamant statements, which kind of puts them like this. And they will, no, you've got it wrong. But if you ask questions and then give them an opportunity to talk, then you have the next question and then the next question. So you're trying to get information, trying to get to the root of what's going on, and what they've already done about it, who they've already talked to. Is this something where they counselor hop and they've been to 15 people and you're just the next opinion? They're hoping for somebody to agree with them, not help them.
Well, that's an interesting statement. Why would you want to not be helped by just being told what you want to hear?
Well, sometimes people want to be able to say to somebody, I'm getting help. So back off. Don't keep talking to me about that, because I'm talking to somebody.
Somebody else.
Yeah, right. I'm talking to a counselor. So that's supposed to back them off from asking or saying anything.
Well, there is a verse that says, in the multitude of counselors there is safety. That's different, though. So how do you distinguish that?
And there are two ways of looking at that. You can look at that as multitude of counselors, as in many counselors give you wise advice. Or you can look at it as, in the multitude, in the group of counselors, in the middle of that you'll find wisdom. So I don't know. I think you have to be careful listening to too many voices.
Oh, definitely. And these days we have so many voices in our ears.
Exactly.
I've noticed that with the student body as well, that it used to be you sort of separated and went away to college and you left that behind, but you don't leave anything behind anymore.
Right.
You just accumulate more and more and more. And with social media, YouTube, TikTok, all of these consumption avenues, podcasts, I hate to say, you're competing as a college professor, as a counselor, as a pastor. You're competing with a lot of other very prominent, very credible sounding, very smart sounding people. And do you feel like modern individuals are well equipped to sort out the truth from that multitude?
Depends on their own history. What I find is that I have students who are knowledgeable. They have lots of knowledge, but they don't always know what to do with it. So it's, I know that's true, but how do I do that? So as a counselor, my job is to help them connect the dots with what they know. It's really their view of God and view of self that directs most of whatever. And if they're on podcasts, if they're on the internet, sometimes they come in thinking they know. So you have to sometimes debunk before you can
bunk.
Yeah.
Rebunk.
But often I say, your opinion doesn't matter and my opinion doesn't matter. But God's opinion is what counts. So let's look there.
The world doesn't tell us that.
No, and a lot of even Christian kids are going to the internet and ungodly counsel because they think it's professional and they have all the answers.
I would guess that kind of individual is even harder to work with than somebody who's a mess and knows it. You know what I mean? Like, this person is already fully deconstructed and imploded and is like, I need help.
Exactly. And they're like a sponge. But what's fun is, like yesterday I met with a gal who at the beginning would not even look at me, the beginning of the semester.
I see.
And she would look at the bottom of my desk. She would look everywhere but at me. And yesterday when we did our wrap up for the semester, she's like a sponge.
That's awesome.
So it's watching people actually do what you say that opens hearts and minds. And it's really the work of the Holy Spirit. I'm just the mouthpiece.
What are you trying to help them understand? You're not necessarily declaring things to them, announcing conclusions and making accusations. You're asking questions,
right?
But you still have a direction to where you want things to go. What is it that you're ultimately trying to help unfold or unpack in helping them to make positive changes?
No, it's usually relationship with the Lord first, because that suffers quickly when people are too busy or they are disappointed. Sometimes people think God is not trustworthy because he has not done what they think he should do. And sometimes I think we have a misguided view of what faith is. I think faith and trust are, these are my requests, Lord, but you do what's best for me. I trust you to do what's best for me. I think even Jesus did that in the garden. He said, nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. So if I can get somebody to that point where they can take their hands off their stuff and say, Lord, whatever, your will be done.
So there's a point of surrender, and then the rebuilding can begin.
Exactly. And that's at stages. That isn't a one-time shot.
Why is okay, good point. That's an everyday thing, probably. Why is that so hard? Why is it so hard for us to trust the Lord, the Creator? We all profess faith in Christ and belief that God created the world and us, and that He's all powerful, all knowing, and loves us. Why is it so hard for us to trust Him with the real decisions of our life? Right?
I think we're afraid that he's not going to direct us like we want him to direct us. And that goes back to pride. I know
Our
better.
own will.
Yeah, I know better. But it started in the garden, didn't start with us.
Yeah, the original sin.
Yeah.
If you go even before the garden, if you look at the fall
Exactly,
from
pride.
of Lucifer,
Yep. He
it
kept
was
saying, I will, I will, I will.
exalt himself. He
Yeah.
had a will of his own, and then
Yeah.
Eve, and then Adam, and the whole temptation was that you can be like God, you can overcome this, and I guess that's just the scourge of sin in the world.
Right.
But it's also, so you see lots of different, over your career of helping people, you see that manifest itself in lots of different, I'll use the word symptoms. Again, it's a clinical type term, but it manifests itself in all kinds of behaviors and acting out. What's the range of those kinds of things where we see that that's not really the root cause, that's the fruit of these roots, and we'll talk more about the root, but what types of things do people come in where they say that I think this is my problem, and you kind of catalog that and say, okay, you think that's your problem. We'll get to that, but to solve it, we've got to go deeper. But just give us an idea about the range of those things.
Oh boy, from A to Z, that is such an individualized thing. Even though everybody's root is pride, doesn't matter what your sin is, everybody's root is pride, but it's manifest differently. And I know this is probably a bad thing to say in our day and time, but it's manifest differently in genders. A man who is fearful comes off as angry a lot of times because they're afraid. Where a woman who is fearful might have a meltdown, but she isn't going to understand a dad who is scared to death about something, and she looked at the anger as abuse. And nastiness towards her.
It may have manifested itself as abuse and nastiness towards her, which is sinful and wrong, but also not necessarily the root cause of why it was done.
Exactly. So you have to get all the parts that you can get, and then you help them with step after step after step.
What about destructive behaviors? Because this is counterintuitive to think that injuring myself or wanting to harm myself is a manifestation of pride. How does that connect?
I'm in charge of me.
It's control.
It's control. And it's the ultimate fist in God's face, especially with suicide. I'm even in control of my own demise. And cutting myself, sometimes, especially women, I don't know so much about guys harming themselves. That's not quite as normal. But women who do that sometimes are trying to atone for their own sin. It's still shedding blood. But it's guilt. It's like I have to punish myself for my sin. And I say, God already did that. Was his blood not sufficient? Both of you don't need to pay for your sin. You don't have the credibility to do that. You have to be perfect. So sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's just flat anger. I'm mad at you, so I'm going to kill myself so you'll hurt like you've hurt me. It's all kinds of things. So you have to get down to, you're not responsible for what people have done to you.
Right.
But you are responsible for your response.
And yet, the victim's response is so hard to manage without feeling somehow guilty, or that I brought this on myself.
Yeah, sometimes
so there's a
they
lot
do.
that to work through there to assure no. And that first part of what you said is that you are not responsible for what this other sinner did to you sinfully.
Right.
And so let's help take away that burden that someone's carrying,
right,
and then to
Gives
look
them
at
hope.
Listen, you can that can stop here, because that becomes oftentimes a cycle and a pattern.
Yes, it does.
Where it's repeated, and it doesn't have to be that way.
Right.
And what's so intriguing about this counseling field is that in our country, in our culture, we have the idea that there are the licensed counselors, the psychologists and the licensed therapists, and they use different terminology. And then we have the biblical counseling, or church-based, or private unlicensed generally, counseling side of things. And these are very, very different worldviews that go into both of these things. A biblical counselor answers the way you did about where these things come from, and it provides a certain answer, and it very much dictates what the therapy is going to be, what the solution is going to be. And then you have this secular counseling arena, which is a very different set of solutions, but just like the root and fruit we just talked about, the same is true within the philosophy of the counselors themselves. Right. And this is a very different worldview that underlies this. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, if you only have humans as your base and your foundation, then you only have what humans can do. And a biblical counselor has God at the root and the Holy Spirit, which is what facilitates change and growth. And so you're not treating symptoms as much as you're treating cause. And secular treats symptoms and is not always even interested in cause.
Right.
Now, I can't speak for them. I'm not one of them, but I have studied that. And I know people who have gone that route. And some of them come back and say they just didn't offer anything. It was take this medication. It was you need to talk. You need, when you're mad, go punch your pillow. And there were just no answers. So I think that's the difference. One offers hope for change. When I say you don't have to live like this, they look at me like, really?
I bet it takes a little bit to convince that that's true.
And when I make them look me in the eye and I say, this was not your fault. You cannot take responsibility for somebody else's sin.
Something that we hear from a lot of the faculty is that they live for the aha moment in the classroom. Yeah. What does that look like in a counseling situation?
I think when they get it and when they understand that it isn't just knowledge. It isn't just I can quote the verses. I know the verses. I read my Bible. They say, I read my Bible and I pray and it just doesn't work.
Yeah. I've heard that.
Oh, I have too, multiple times. So you have to unpack that statement and go down to, okay, what's driving your prayer and what's driving your reading? And if you're reading, are you saying, okay, what does that verse mean? And if I started living by that verse, what needs to change? And
those are uncomfortable questions.
And they look at me and go, well, no, I don't think I've ever done that. I said, well, let's do that. Let's take Philippians 4 and go through that together and see how we do with applying Scripture.
What happens when you do that is it peels back your summary statements of, oh, yes, I believe the Bible.
Exactly.
Oh, yes, I believe in God.
Yep.
And now it really tests you to prove it.
Yep.
Because what you believe isn't just what you profess and what you say, but what your actions reveal about what you really believe.
Yeah, it's functional belief.
Yeah. And so you're saying, okay, well, if you believe the Bible, and hopefully we can at least start from that baseline of common understanding. So if you say that you believe the Bible, and the Bible says this, are you doing that? Is that faithfully a part of your practice? And how do you then express and explain that this is the work of God in their life and not simply, sort of balancing what's given to them as homework and as personal responsibility versus the real work of the Holy Spirit to bring healing and change?
No, we talk about that every session.
Yeah.
It's not about me. I don't want people dependent on me as a counselor. The dependence is on the Lord. So my job is to put their hand in His hand and connect them. And I facilitate that every time we meet. He gets the honor and glory. It isn't about my experience. When people say, well, you just don't understand, I say, I don't have to have experienced that to understand the answer. How does experience change the answer? And they just kind of look at me like, well, yeah, I guess that makes sense. I don't have to take drugs to know that drugs are wrong and harmful and hurtful. And here's the answer from Scripture.
Yeah. These philosophies come straight from existentialism,
Yes,
which
they
would
do.
say that your experience is your truth.
And it's your answer, and it's the answer for him if he comes to see me.
Yeah, and
No,
so
it's not.
if you haven't had my experience, you can't know my
Exactly.
truth, and therefore you don't even have a reason to speak.
Right.
I saw it happen in a news interview the other day, and the man was explaining truth and statistics and economics and realities of our world, and the host said, "But you don't have the right skin color to even talk about this." And I thought, yeah, that's existentialism. I was reading about it for class and preparing, and I thought, this is a great example of, listen, that's my truth and this is your truth. And at some level, then it becomes absurd and language almost has no meaning.
Right.
Because I've decided to call this a car instead of a microphone, and you can say you don't believe in my car, and I can say I do, and at the end of the day, it makes no sense at all.
Right. Misuse of language.
And honestly, science goes out the window. All of these so-called secular pursuits are actually wrapped right into biblical truth.
Yes.
Christian worldview actually underlies what makes sense of our entire reality.
Right.
And, that's where I think our society feels like, well, your Christian faith is good for you as a Christian, but I don't believe it, so it means nothing to me. And it shouldn't be the basis for our culture and our society, our laws, the way we interact. You say, well, now hang on a second. It's not just my truth. Right. And that's what we have to be careful about in postmodernism, too, is the fact that there are plenty of people out there that will say, oh, that's good for you. You can have your Christian faith, and I'll have mine, and we'll just coexist, and everything's fine. But these ideologies clash at a fundamental level,
they do.
And they make a real-world impact in the way that people live their lives.
Right.
And you're seeing in the counseling arena the end result of the choices that are made along those lines. Ultimately, do whatever you want because the here and now is all that matters and your experiences are all that matters. It really appeals to the flesh.
Yes. Pride.
But my question is, does it work? Does it bring the fulfillment that it promises?
Look at our society today. I think the answer's obvious.
Well, why? I mean, what are you seeing as the effects of that?
I think it morphs into not only you can believe what you want to believe and I'll believe what I want to believe, but it really goes farther than that. It's you can do whatever you want, and as long as you're not hurting me, it doesn't matter to me. And I talk with Christian kids a lot that say, well, I'm not going to get involved in that because it isn't hurting me.
Not yet. Or maybe it actually is in ways you don't understand.
Yeah, well, having that approach is hurtful. It's wrong.
But so you attack the very underpinning philosophy of that.
Yeah.
And that is our society's philosophy. Live and let live. Everybody get along. And personally, as a Baptist, we have individual soul liberty. We will each stand before God and be accountable for our own decisions, what we do with Jesus. But there's a distinction there between giving people the freedom to individually accept Christ and make the decisions for themselves from a religious standpoint versus the fundamental truths that underlie our society and respect for one another. One author said, in the law of the jungle, there's no room for the law of love. And that's the problem, is that you gave a caveat in that statement that people will always throw out, as long as I'm not hurting you, what's the big deal? But the real philosophy that undergirds that wouldn't allow for that exception even. Because why should I not hurt you if it advances me?
Right.
And I think that's really where our culture is seen.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, we're looking at looting in California, where they just walk in and literally take everything off the shelves of an entire store.
Well, they did it in Madison.
They did this in Madison?
Well, a couple summers ago. It was awful.
Yeah. When we had the riots going on in Janesville.
Yeah.
And then you've done some work and helped with Wisconsin Family Action and some of the work that they did. And then the decision comes out striking down Roe v. Wade. It might even have been when the thing was leaked, actually. Was it even before or after the decision actually came out? They firebombed their offices.
Yeah, well, Jolene's office, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And talk about a scary time, where people are literally engaging in domestic terrorism in order to attack the truth. What is it about the truth that's so offensive to people that reject it?
Well, when you think about Satan's job is to steal, kill, and destroy. and he's the father of lies.
Hmm.
That's all he knows.
Mm-hmm.
So if he can get people to side with him or agree with him, even as Christians, we buy into such ridiculous things sometimes, and it plays right into his hands. We believe lies, and then we act on lies. And one of the lies is, I'm my own person, I'm my own, the master of my fate, as you would. So I get to make all the decisions.
And so
well, that worked well in the garden, didn't it? Satan baited Eve with, make your own decision. God doesn't really mean what he says.
Mm-hmm. But when the truth exposes the lie, then the truth has to be silenced for the lie to continue.
Exactly.
And I'm seeing that right now in our culture as well.
Right.
It really is interesting how it all fits together. And I think what anybody in the world is looking for is an explanation of reality that adequately explains what they truly observe and feel and see. And all of these different worldviews provide answers for those questions. Mm-hmm. The real question is, what is truth? You know, Pilate asked that question at the trial of Jesus, and you know, I have interpreted that different ways and thought through how that must have. Did he ask it rhetorically? Was he wistful and
right.
you know, talking to himself, or was he really inquiring of Jesus to answer the question, or, you know, all the different ways you could take that. But it is the question of our age. Mm-hmm. What is truth? And the Bible provides us with a solid foundation for our lives. Absolutely. In a way that meaningfully and powerfully can intervene and protect us from what God doesn't want us to experience, is the harm that comes from that fun life of sin.
Yeah. So
I guess in the final act of our time together, I guess I'd like to explore your development of the mission that you have and the role in ministry that you have. And it's very personal, and it's very engaging with kind of a lot of one-on-one and that. Also in teaching in the classroom, and a lot of your classes are even then very intentionally kept very small so you can have lots of interaction, and so they're very based on that. So help me understand like the progression of your career and how you talk to people about sort of identifying the specific will of God for them as you're trying to live a life purposefully and on this mission that you have. How does that materialize and show up in the decisions that you decide to pursue from a career standpoint or from a ministry standpoint, amongst all the many different options that a person has?
Well, that's an interesting question. How far back do you want me to go?
Well, it's your story. Baton twirling to whatever. That'd be good.
Well, that was high school. I was not even a believer in high school. And I would say when I went to Miami as a teacher, I was thrown into a totally different culture. I'm a Midwestern girl, and I'm now in South Florida with Spanish certainly more prevalent than English anywhere you go, and having to learn to communicate in a different way with people. But counseling has always been, if you want to call it that, mentoring, discipling has always been a part, even of teaching kids. Families have needs. Now, has it developed over the years? I hope so. I hope I'm not still the same as I was all those years ago. But my heart is the same. My mission, I probably couldn't have told you that at the time, would have been the same. But has developed, like I said, other people's investment, other people's training, other people being kind enough to say, you might not want to approach it that way. Because that's love too, loving somebody enough to speak truth kindly. But landing where I am, I think I can say only God. I had never planned to come here as Dean of Women. When Dr. Weniger asked me, I said no like 3 times.
He could be very insistent.
Yeah. And I finally said, what do you think I can do for you that you won't take no for an answer? And he listed out all those things. And then I came on campus and he left the same week.
No way.
Yeah. So
you had to be questioning, oh boy, what did I get myself into?
Well, I thought this is going to be interesting. If he's the only one that knows why he hired me, this is going to be a very interesting year.
Hopefully he told some people that he hired you.
Yes.
Who are you?
Yeah.
I work here.
Yeah. And it was just a hard time.
Yeah.
At that time.
It was a rocky situation, and probably a lot of people don't know all the history of that and don't need to.
No.
But it was a tumultuous departure. It wasn't a nice, planned, smooth transition, and yet God preserved Maranatha.
Right.
I mean, as a college, didn't really miss a beat. The students wouldn't have been, as aware. I think maybe today there's more emphasis on who the leaders are and what's happening and the politics and the behind the scenes and like it's some kind of soap opera, and we all have to have a right to know.
Yeah.
We're seeing examples of that play out. But at the time, a lot of us were kind of in the dark about the reasons, but it was obviously not a good situation necessarily. Right. And so it was left to those of you in the administration to sort of calm things down and refocus everyone's attention on what really matters. And it was remarkable to see how smoothly things went, even in spite of what could have been a disastrous, scandalous, even if people wanted to make it that way, type of a situation.
And probably had I not been already, my age at that time was in my 40s, and already had administrative experience, I didn't need somebody to train me and tell me how to do what I knew to do here, but I was never even introduced. So I called a meeting of the girls one night after dorm lock in the gym and introduced myself, gave my testimony, introduced the dorm soups, explained who I was, where I came from, what my mission was for that year, and tried to get them on my team kind of thing, you know. So that was an interesting
really
start, But I'm thinking, had I been 25 with no administrative experience, no real experience of anything, I'm not sure I would have stayed. I might have said, see ya.
Yeah. I don't know where
I
I'm
can
going.
go teach anywhere.
Yeah,
I can go do
somewhere.
lots of things, but I don't have to be here. Yeah.
That was a tumultuous onboarding. And then, you have in the dean's office.
Are we done?
I don't know. We have something happening.
The remote's probably picking up.
We'll do the techno. That's a fun part about the live stream. We can edit that out.
I recommend some content to watch. To do a voice search, hold down the mic button while speaking.
This is good. Classic.
Oh, this is fantastic.
All right.
Comedy of errors.
I don't even know what
All
you're
right,
saying.
I have a question.
Okay. Yes, sir.
All right, so here's my question. As a leader, how do you protect your mindset when you see your mentees move on, knowing that they're going to make their choices? That's a hard stop where your experience with them, maybe they've moved on, they've graduated. How do you protect your mindset, knowing that you still need to do your job?
I think that's a daily thing. And if I don't commit the people to the Lord who come to see me, and I think it's all about me and my connection with them, and their choices are driven by me, that'll eat my lunch. I can't do that.
I know exactly what you mean.
I can't do that. I have to leave them in God's hands.
Yeah.
My job is to faithfully put truth on the table and to kindly speak truth and to do all in my power, like I said, with the resources, talents, abilities to communicate and all of that. I do everything that God's given me the ability to do. But change is up to Him. And their choices are their choices. I'm not responsible for that. So I have to separate their choices from my choices. And do I think some of them go out and do exactly opposite of what was recommended? I know they do. But I had a mentor that was in Miami, very patient with me. And I gave him a run for his money, to be very honest with you. So I remember that when I'm having to be patient with people that want to fight and argue and debate every piece of truth that you put on the table. And I have to kindly and patiently say, you can make your own choice, but you don't choose your consequences. And this is what God says. But I'm not trying to change them. That's God's job.
Yeah. But it doesn't mean that you don't also go back in your mind to what could I have said or done or helped.
Absolutely. And sometimes
So
you just weep.
Yeah.
You know, you
there's
think,
a personal connection to that, yeah.
Right. But if we end on a note where they know the door's always open. I don't care what you've done, where you've been, or what you're involved in at the moment, call me.
Yeah.
I will come. Went to Milwaukee one time, a gal that decided to join the military, left the dorm, went to Milwaukee, and she called another gal in town who called me, and they said, there is drug stuff going on in their room, and on, and she was scared to death. Well, I got Doug Richards, who was dean of students at the time. Nobody messes with him. I said, can we go to Milwaukee and pick this girl up? So we went in where angels fear to tread.
Yeah. She's no longer even a student at this point, and
no.
you're just doing this at a personal...
It didn't matter.
Yeah.
Did not matter. She called for help, and off we went. Because that's our mission. It has nothing to... Well, I shouldn't say it had nothing to do with Maranatha, but...
A little bit.
Yeah, it's where I'm serving.
Yeah.
But it has to be who I am. No matter where I go, what I do, what season of life I'm in. I don't think that... And I love retirement from the dean's office. I don't have to make all those decisions. But I don't ever want to retire from serving.
Amen.
Or being usable or used in his hands. So that's kind of... You have to guard your own heart to stay usable.
It's probably one of the most frustrating things for someone in counseling when the person you're trying to help not only rejects what truth you're trying to get to, but that also then wants to turn it around and be antagonistic towards the counselor. And we've all had that.
We know that.
And it's a natural response, defensive mechanism probably. In the legal side, it's just as prevalent. And I just usually smile and back away and say, listen, your best thinking got you into this hole. It's not going to get you out.
Well,
I'm here with a ladder trying to help you.
And if they go out and say things that aren't true, I can't go and defend myself. Confidentiality.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
But I sometimes want to wear a sign, don't believe everything you hear.
Yeah, two sides to every pancake rule. Two sides to every story.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I am so thankful that we've had this time, but that most of all to be able to reflect on God's faithfulness in your life and the life of so many hundreds that you've had the opportunity to help. And it really is a privilege for us to be used of God, to be in a situation, to be trusted with someone's deepest fears and concerns and problems. That's a position of great honor and privilege and trust. I never take that for granted.
Me
I know
neither.
you don't. And so I'm thankful that you maintain a role with that, with our students, and your love and concern is so evident, your passion to serve the Lord, and it's just a great testimony and a pattern for so many others. Thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you. It's been a good discussion.
Yep.
Thank you for joining us today. On Mission is a production of Maranatha Baptist University. Subscribe to On Mission on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to leave a review, as this will help other growing leaders find these conversations. For information about our guests, previous episodes, and general information about On Mission or MBU, go to mbu.edu/podcast. Join us again next week as we examine what keeps leaders on mission.